In this video, we're going to talk about the sample notes app for Alpha Anywhere, which you can see running here in the mobile simulator. And we're going to discuss how the styling of the list control that is displayed over here to show the notes in the Notes app was done. So you can see that we're running the demo Notes application in the mobile simulator over here, and we have a list control that is displaying all of the current notes. And when I tap on an item in the list, you can see that the selected item is animated and a toolbar shows up underneath it. Then when I tap on it a second time, the animation takes place again and the rotation of the list item gets removed, and then the toolbar shows up and then is removed. So we're going to now go and discuss the basic concepts behind the styling of this list control, because this here is just a standard UX component list control. And if we go to the designer here and go to controls, we can see that here is that list control over there. So I'm going to go now to a new component that I've created, and in this component what we actually have are 6 different list controls, and if we go into working preview, we can see that here are the 6 list controls: 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6. And each one of these list controls is displaying the same data. It's displaying the notes from the database, so it's displaying the notes that are displayed in the Notes application, but each list has progressively more styling applied to the list, so that by the time we get to the last list here, we have a list that is functioning very similarly to the one in the sample application. So first, what I'd like to do is point out that if we go to properties here, that the style name for this component is called Notes app. Then what I'd like to do is actually run the component in Firefox so we can inspect some of the HTML here. So if we go and we point to one of the items in the list, we can see that by looking here at, let's just make this a little bit bigger here, we can see that each item in the list is contained inside a div, and that the div has a class name of Notes app, which is the name of the style sheet, followed by Note list item. So Note list item is a class that is applied to every single item in a list. So if I was using the iOS style, then this would be iOS Note list item, or if I was using, say, GR Blue style, this would be GR Blue list item. Furthermore, if I go in Firebug here, if we look in the Style tab, we can actually see what the CSS is for this particular CSS class name. And one of the important things to note here is that the padding at the bottom has been set to 46 pixels. So that's the reason why these list items here appear to be fairly far from each other. If I were to go to padding bottom there and temporarily turn off that property, you can see how the list items get closer to each other. You can see there, when I turn off the padding at the bottom, the list items are now touching each other. So there's list item 1, there's list item 2. If I turn it back on, I can see that there's now 46 pixels of padding between each item. So now let's just go back now to the builder, and I'm going to just quickly open up TextPad, where I've actually got style.css. So this is the CSS style for the Notes application. So this is being read from the CSS folder, and then inside the CSS folder there's another folder called Notes app, and inside Notes app is the style.css file. And I've pulled out some of the important classes over here, so you can see here's the class that puts in the 46 pixels of padding after each line item. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing our discussion now of the Notes app, and now let's go here first and take a look at the first list control here, so we can see that it's based on a SQL query going against the Notes database, and then we're pulling in these fields from the database. So let's actually go pull in a couple more fields. It doesn't really matter at this point which fields we pull in, And then we can see that we've gone to the list properties and we've set the layout to be a freeform layout. And then we've gone to the list template here, and we've just put one field after another with a break after each field. So we've got the ID, the type, the board, and then the color. And the color is one of the fields inside the table that indicates what the background color of that particular list item should be. So if we go to working preview now, we can see that here's the list, but it's completely unformatted. So now let's show how we went from this completely unformatted list over here to this list over here, which has the beginnings of the format applied to it. So we'll go back to design mode and now take a look at list number 2. So the first thing to notice is that in the fields list here, we've changed the control type of color from a label to raw data. And the reason that we've chosen raw data is that we'd like to use color. We'd like the raw value in color, which would just be red, blue, green, etc., as opposed to the label, which would have HTML span tags around it, etc. And then if we go to the list layout, we can see that we've now taken our template and we've wrapped it in a div, and we've given the div a class of notes app note, and then color is actually used inside the class name. So that means that if the first note happens to have a value in the color field, say of red, then the class name that's going to be applied to that list item would be notes app note red. And so therefore you can see that it was important that we set color to be raw data, because we want this here to just simply say red and not angle bracket span red, etc. So now notes app note and then red is one of the selectors in our CSS file. So let's go back to our CSS file now, and we can see that what we've done is we've actually pulled notes app red here and pulled it out into the separate document so we can find it easily. And we can see here that we have a class name called notes app note red, and there's the background color of red being applied to that particular note. So we also have a CSS selector called notes app note green and notes app note blue, etc. So there's one CSS selector for each different color that we would like to display. The other important thing to note is that we also have something called a pseudo class over here. So notes app note red and then colon after is a special CSS selector that says after you've rendered something that has a class of notes app note red, render another element and give it a class of this. So there are special CSS selectors for after, before, first letter, etc. And if you do a Google on CSS selectors, you can read up more information about this. But basically this is how we put some additional markup after the list item. And the most important thing to note here is that we've basically got a background URL, a background image for this selector that is an image called notes red PNG. So if we go and look at that image, which is in the style sheet, you can see we've got this red line with a curve in it, and that's how we get the curve underneath each item in the list. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing our discussion of the notes application, and what we've shown over here is how the class name for each note is dynamically selected by using a placeholder inside the class name, and this color field was specially set here to be raw data. So if we go now and we look at the list now, we can see that this one is using the class name that ends in blue because the color was blue, and this one over here is using a class name of red, and this one is using a class name of green, etc. And you can see also that we have this curved image underneath each list, and that was done by using that special colon after directive in the CSS class name. So if we look furthermore here, we can see that within each list there's no styling going on. But if we look at this list over here, this third list, we can see that the data inside each item has a style. So let's go back to the builder now and look at the third list control, and we can see here, if we go to the list template, we can see that each item in the list now has a special class name applied. So here's note title, note deadline, and note content. So these all refer to selectors in the CSS style. And then the other important thing that I'd like to point out is, let's just zoom this window to make it a little bit bigger, is that we can see that we also have an image over here, and the image itself, let me just scroll this over, is the star image, which indicates whether the image itself has been starred or not, whether it's been selected. And the image itself has been set to display none. So the image is hidden initially, but the important thing to note here is that the ID of this image contains the list control ID. So dialog.list_id is one of the placeholders that's available to you. So if this list was, say, list 1, then this would resolve to list 1 over here. If this list was called list 2, this would resolve to list 2, etc. Then this is the zero-based row number. So for the first item in the list, this has a value of 0. For the second item in the list, this has a value of 1, etc. And the reason that we use that here is we want each div, each image in the list, to have a unique ID. So this ID for the first row will have a 0 in it, for the second row will have a 1, for the third row will have a 2, etc. So this is giving us a unique ID for this image control, which is going to allow us to either turn the image on or off depending on whether the value in this field over here, starred, is true or false. But initially the image is hidden, so when we go and we run the component and we look at notes number 3, which is this control over here, we don't see any of the stars. They're not showing. Whereas over here you can see that if we go to this this item, we can see there's a star showing over here. So at this point now we've added more styling to each item in the list, but we haven't yet assigned the stars to display, and we also haven't achieved the random rotation of each list item. So as you can see here, if we look at these different lists, you can see they're all randomly rotated by a small amount, and some of them are indented and some of them are outdented. So you can see that the left border of this list is to the left of the left border of this list item over here. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing our discussion of the notes application, and next we're going to discuss how each item in the list is rotated by some random amount, either to the left or the right, and also has an X offset. So you can see here, for example, this list item over here has a small rotation to the right, whereas this one has a small rotation to the left. You can also see that, for example, the left borders of these lists are not lined up. Some of them are outdented and some of them are indented. And then you can also see here that the star is displaying for this item. It's not being displayed for this item. And finally, you can also see that this item is a little bit smaller than that item over here. So this is all achieved in the on-item draw event of the list, which allows you to use JavaScript to modify the row as it's being drawn. So let's go back now and take a look at the on-item draw event for the list. So the first thing that I'd like to do is actually go back to the list properties and look at the list layout. And you can see here that the list template has a div which has a class name which we've previously discussed, but you can see that this div does not have an ID associated with it. And because it doesn't have an ID associated with it, we're going to need to use different JavaScript techniques to get a pointer to this div at runtime, and that's going to be one of the things that we discuss when we look at the on-item draw event. So Let's go back now to the on-item draw event. So we'll go back now to our list properties, go over here to list properties, and bring up the on-item draw event over here. So if we look at this event handler over here, we can see that we're using Ellie, which is passed into the event handler, and Ellie is the element that contains the row, that contains the data. So Ellie gives us a pointer to the container for each row of data, and therefore Ellie.firstChild is going to give us a pointer to the div that contains all of the controls. So even though we didn't give the div an explicit ID using the JavaScript firstChild property, we can still get a pointer to the div that contains the elements that are shown for the current row. First, again, let's talk about how the star is displayed. So we saw previously that the star was part of the template, but it was hidden. We had a style display none on the template, and we also saw how we gave the image control a unique ID. So here we're going to get the unique ID for the star, and if data.start is true, then we're going to go and set the display to quote quote, which makes the image visible. Otherwise the image will remain hidden. So this is how the actual star was displayed if the data in the current row had the word true in it. And this is the code over here that actually applies the transformation to the row. So let's pause now and discuss the JavaScript that does this transformation. So we're continuing our discussion now of how the items in the list are transformed randomly. So the first thing that we do is create a variable called xtrans, which is a random number between +6 and -6. So this is the JavaScript that generates that random number between +6 and -6. And this is the amount in pixels that we would like to offset each item in the list. And then we have another random number between -4 and +4, which is the rotation in degrees that we would like to apply to each item. So then we construct a CSS transformation command using the scale, translate x, and rotate function. So this basically scales the item to 90% of its size. This translates, this means this moves the x position by this amount of pixels, and this rotates by this random amount. This is a value in degrees. So now we need to apply this transformation command to the div that contains all of the controls for the current row. So we discussed earlier that Ellie.firstChild gives us a pointer to that div, and then we set in the style property the appropriate CSS3 transformation and transition. Now the problem that we run into is that each browser has a different name for this property. So in order to make this code run on all browsers, the Alpha 5 JavaScript library stores inside the A5 namespace a special property here which gives us the name of the transform DOM property for the different browsers. So for IE this will just be transform, and for WebKit this will be WebKit transform, and for Mozilla it'll be Mozilla transform, etc. So this is just how we make the code run across all browsers rather than writing a complex if statement testing which browser you're on. So we're setting the transform property to this command that we computed over here, and here we're basically setting the transition property to a 500 millisecond transition. So the actual transformation is done over 500 milliseconds. We can ignore this code over here. This is just optimization for iOS so that we can reduce the amount of flicker on iOS. And then next what you'll see is that we're also going to store this command, this transformation command, in an arbitrary attribute called note transformation inside the div. So $SA is a JavaScript command in the Alpha Anywhere library called set attribute. So we're setting the note transformation attribute to this command. And the reason that we want to store this command is that later on we're going to show that how when you tap on the row the transformation is removed so that you can then go ahead and edit the row. So this is the code that stores the transformation that was applied to each row. So now what happens is, as the list is drawn, the onItemDraw event gets called for each row in the list, and then this random transformation is applied to the row. So that means that when the list is rendered, each item in the list has this random transformation. So let's go ahead now and take a look at that. So if we go now and look at this list, which is this one over here, we can see that this random transformation has been applied. So this list now has this random transformation to the right, and this list has a random transformation to the left, etc. And that was all done in the onItemDraw. Now if we go to the fifth list here, we can see that when we tap on a row, the transformation that was applied when the list was initially rendered gets removed, so that the list can then be edited, and to also indicate that the list has been selected. So we're going to discuss next how this animation is done in the next video. So we're continuing our discussion of the Notes application, and we're going to discuss now how this animation is applied when the user taps on an item in the list. So you can see that when the list was initially rendered, this particular item here was given a random rotation to the right, but when I tap on it, it gets untransformed, and then if I tap on it a second time, or if I tap on another list item, the original transformation is applied. So let's go and see how that was done. So we'll go back to the list over here, we'll go to the list properties, and we'll look at the onSelect event, which fires when the user taps on a row. And let's just focus initially on this code over here. So what this is saying, this.selection.length is greater than 0. So this is a pointer to the list itself. This.selection is an array of the rows that were selected. So this tells me that if a row was selected, which means that this.selection.length is greater than 0, then what we're going to do is first of all get a pointer, this is going to be Ellie, to the container for the current row. So this the rows themselves, if you look inside the DOM using Firefox, are stored inside an element called this.containerID, and then .0, .1, etc. So this is giving us a pointer to the row itself, and then Ellie.firstChild is giving us a pointer to the div for the freeform template. And what we're doing is we're setting the style, the transformation property inside the style object to null. So this is how we remove the transformation that was applied in the on-row render. So this causes the list item to become unrotated, and also it removes the 90% scaling that was originally done. And then we're going to store the row number that the user selected inside a property of the list called oldSelection. So this is just a variable that we're keeping track of. So if the user clicks on row 0, then this dot oldSelection will be equal to row 0. And then when the user goes and clicks on another row, we'll know what the previous row that the user clicked on was. So again, let's go here and run this and walk through the code again. So here we go. Scroll down on the list, tap on an item, and as we tap on the item here, as we tap on this item, you can see the animation gets, the original transformation is being removed. And then if we tap on this item over here, the transformation is being removed. If we tap on it a second time, then the transformation is reapplied. So if we go back to design mode, go back to the select event, the on select event, and this code over here is the code that is applying the transformation to the item after the item has been deselected. So the critical parts about this code over here is, as you recall, when we discussed the on item draw event, we stored the transformation that was applied to each item inside an attribute called note transformation. So when the user has deselected an item after having selected it, we need to reapply the transformation that was originally applied at the initial render, and that transformation command was stored in the note transformation attribute. So here we're going to read the value out of that attribute using the get attribute command, and then we're going to apply the transformation to the list. So this is how the transformation is applied when an item that was selected becomes deselected. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing our discussion now on the Notes application, and in this last segment now we're going to discuss how when the user taps on a row in the list, the animation is removed as we discussed in the previous video, but also you can see that a toolbar is displayed underneath the selected item. So if I now go and click on the next row, this toolbar will get hidden, and then the new toolbar will be shown underneath that list. Then when I click on a button, you can see that an action is performed. So we'll go back to the builder now, and we can see that in the UX component we have 3 buttons that have been wrapped inside a container that has a subtype of injectable. So any content that's in an injectable container is meant to be injected somewhere else when the component is rendered, and we'll discuss where this injectable content is going to be rendered. But first let's look at the controls in the injectable container. So the first button is just simply displaying an image from the style sheet called icon edit, and this one is displaying icon star off, and this one is displaying icon trash.png. Then the toolbar, the window, the container itself has a class applied to it, and this class gives the toolbar the semi-transparent background. So now let's go and take a look at Notes 5 itself. So we'll go over to List Properties and then go here to the List Properties, and you can see that we've turned on the data header. And then if we go and look inside the HTML header here, you can see that we've got injectable content and then the name of the container that contains the injectable content. So that means that whatever is inside the container called Notes Toolbar will be injected into the header of this list. So now let's go and take a look at what's behind this class name, Note App Toolbar, over here. So here we are inside the style.css file, and here's the definition of that class, Notes App Note Toolbar. And we can see that the key item here is that the top of the toolbar has been positioned at -1000 pixels. So that means that the toolbar actually will not be visible. It's been moved completely off the screen. And you can see here's the background that gives us that transparent background. So the opacity here is set to 0.35, and we've got a border radius of 6 pixels. So that gives us the rounded border. So even though inside the list we've said that this injectable content should be displayed as the list header, the class definition has actually moved the toolbar completely off the screen. So when the list is initially rendered, as you can see over here, the toolbar is not visible because it's been moved completely off the screen. However, when I tap on the row, the toolbar does become visible. So now let's go and take a look at what happens when we select a row. So when we go here and select a row, we can see that all of the JavaScript that we discussed in the previous video is still there, but in addition we now are calling a JavaScript function called setToolbar, and that's the code that's actually making the toolbar visible. So let's pause now and pick it up in the next video where we'll discuss what's going on inside this function. So we're continuing now to discuss how the toolbar gets displayed when the user taps on an item. So let's go to our JavaScript functions now and look at the definition of the setToolbar function. So the first thing that we're going to do is get a pointer to the list control. So our list control was called notes 5, and so now LOBJ is now a pointer to the list control, and here we're going to see what's currently selected. So list object.selection is an array of the selected rows, and if the length of that array is 0, then there's nothing selected, and if the length is not 0, then there is one or more items have been selected. So here what we're going to do is we're going to get a pointer to the element for the selected row in the list. So basically the element ID is going to be list obj.contid, and then we're going to add in a 0 or a 1 or a 2 depending on the current row that is selected. So this is giving us a pointer to the currently selected row. Now we also know that the toolbar itself was contained inside a container called notes toolbar, and the naming convention that is used in the UX component for any element is the component name .v.r1 and then notes toolbar. Now we could have found this out also very easily by just examining the component running in Firebug. So this is giving us a pointer now to the toolbar itself, and now all we're doing over here is we're setting the position of the toolbar to be 48 pixels above the bottom of the currently selected row. Now we know that there's going to be 46 pixels of space, or 48 pixels of space, 46 pixels of space in between each item in the list, because in the first video we discussed how the class for the list item puts 46 pixels of padding between each row. So what we're doing over here is just simply moving the top of the toolbar to be 48 pixels from the bottom of the currently selected row, and then we're positioning the left edge of the toolbar at the 50% mark horizontally on the list. We are displaying the toolbar, so we're setting the style.display to a null string, so that makes the toolbar visible, and then we're setting the toolbar margin over here so that the toolbar is horizontally centered. And if there's nothing selected, then you can see we go and we set the toolbar style.display to none. So this simple JavaScript code over here is all that is necessary to make the toolbar visible when the user clicks on a current row. So what we've shown here in this series of videos is how, with some fairly simple CSS and JavaScript, we're able to create a really nicely styled list control and create a very effective user experience for a mobile application or a desktop web application. And what we've shown is the tremendous flexibility in styling the list control. Thank you very much for watching.